Okay, hi, I'm Leann Forst, board certified holistic health practitioner and owner of groovybeats.com. And today I would like to welcome my guest, Traci Altman. And I'm really excited about having Traci on the show because she's going to talk to us today about Hashimoto's in kids. And I want to tell you a little bit about Traci first. Traci earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and has an MBA in marketing and communications and media management from Fordham University. And after working and going to school and living in New York City for 15 years, Traci got married and soon became a mother to a set of twin girls in 2008 and another set of twins, a boy and a girl, in 2010. And since becoming a mom, she has stayed home with the kids and moved to the suburbs, keeping busy and managing the household. But after mentoring many of her friends and family on their quest to health, she discovered her true calling, and after graduated from the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, she started her own health coach practice in 2016 and now helps many clients with their health and wellness. So I know that the story goes much deeper than that on how you got on your health journey, Traci, but I'm going to let you tell it for our listeners.
Hi there. Thank you, Leann. You know, it still sounds strange when I hear somebody say I've had two sets of twins. It still sounds odd to me that I went through that and lived to tell about it. So I guess my journey for health and wellness started, 20 plus years ago. I was a single gal living in New York City, and I started having some strange symptoms. It would range from gastric issues, digestive issues, to adult onset acne, fibromyalgia, all kinds of sort of diagnoses or undiagnoses, I like to say, you know. And back then in the 90s, the doctors were still saying, oh, it's psychosomatic. You're young, you're living in New York City, and I was working full time and also putting myself through college full time classes. And so they would always just point to that as you have too much on your plate, you're too stressed, and they're causing all of these symptoms. But you know, I saw so many different specialists for a variety of different things, and the doctors always said that same thing, but they said it in sort of a condescending, I'm not really listening to you way. And sometimes they'd give me a prescription for something and send me on my way. And some things would get better, and some things wouldn't, and sometimes other things would pop up. And this went on for a few years. And I'm a pretty intuitive person, and I paid really close attention to what was going on with my body, how I was feeling emotionally, as well as how I was feeling physically. And I started to notice that, or I started to feel like there was a connection between all of these things. It couldn't be that my body was just going haywire, because I was a healthy gal and, tried to get enough sleep back then. It was, 6 hours was enough. Now
Yeah.
that's true. But I started to really pay attention to things. And I also started to see a naturopathic doctor who started to talk to me and introduce me to alternative ways of looking about my health or thinking about my health and wellness. And I really realized at that time, again, in my sort of early and mid 20s, that the doctors weren't taking care of my wellness. You know, they were taking care of my symptoms. They were just addressing my symptoms. And I would go home and I was still me, and I still had all of these things that were weighing so heavy on me, the physical symptoms and then the emotional symptoms of it. And sometimes you feel like you're crazy. When I went to the naturopath, I was introduced to this alternative way of thinking about it. So I bought these books because it wasn't, available on the internet back then. There was no Googling or good research available. So I would go to the library and I would get these books, and I started to notice that, when he diagnosed me with certain things, food sensitivities and, a slew of other stuff, when I started to address it with supplementation, meditation, and also changing my diet, it pretty quickly made a significant difference. And so that's what really set me on my path, because I realized that the doctors didn't have all the answers and they really weren't taking care of my wellness. When I went to the dermatologist, he just wanted to take care of, the adult onset acne. And by the way, he prescribed me an antibiotic for a year, which caused so many other kinds of problems in me. I mean,
and about what time frame or what year was this happening to you? What?
Probably 95. And so that really sent me on a really bad trajectory. And I went back to the doctor because then the gastroenterologist said, oh, you shouldn't be taking antibiotics. You've been taking them for 9 months. And the dermatologist said to me something that really stuck with me all these years. And he said, you came to me for your acne. Did I fix it? Did I cure you of that? And I said, well, yeah, my skin looks great again. I always had good skin and now it looks great again. And he said, okay, that's it. I did my job. This other stuff, I can't really comment on it. And I left in tears because I thought, wow, this is it. This is how doctors now function, these specialists, and I'm in New York City. I have at my fingertips. I can walk to, many of the best physicians in the world. And this is what they had to offer to me. So you take care of one thing and a whole bunch of other stuff pops up.
Right.
And, being a smart gal and an intuitive gal, I was like, this is why I'm having all these problems. And this is why I don't have these answers. And I really need to figure out for myself and pay close attention to everything that I do, because I think it's a lot of things that get us to that point. And so it's going to be a lot of things that get us healthy. It's not one pill that the doctor prescribes for you, or the 2 or 10 pills that the doctor prescribes. It's a lot of lifestyle and environmental things that need to be done. And that stuck with me, and that put me on that path in another direction. And I still had to see those specialists for certain things. But I realized that there was this whole gray area between a naturopathic doctor and all of these great specialists at my disposal in New York City. And there was this big, huge, vast area. And what was the bridge? And so I had to figure out what was in between. And then, interestingly enough, around 1998, I had the awesome opportunity to go hear Dr. Andrew Weil speak at this seminar that I was invited to, and I actually got to meet him personally. And that was it. That was it. And I still remember, I can still feel that moment when that light bulb went off and I said, this is it. This is the gray area. And back then, integrative medicine, that gray area that brought that all together, didn't really exist. He was sort of a pioneer that brought that field into the forefront, and it took, almost 20 years before it really started to catch on. And in the bigger cities, you can find these doctors now, although it's still hard and it's still, occasionally your insurance covers an integrative physician. And that's even changed in the past 5 years, which is so exciting.
Right.
But that was the gray area, and I started to read his books and pay close attention to him. And that set me on my path and really an understanding that there's something to this. I'm not crazy. This isn't psychosomatic, which was just the way that the doctors would write it off. It's psychosomatic. You're anxious and you're stressed. Although, as we both know, there's definitely a truth to living with anxiety and what that does to your hormones and how that changes your experience and can definitely cause a whole slew of health issues. But it's not something that's all in your head. It's something that's very real. And, physicians are starting to pay attention to that. And it's super exciting.
That is very exciting. Now, tell me, fast forward to when you had your kids, your babies, and your daughter's diagnosis, and how this early experience for you shaped how you raised your children. Tell us about that journey.
So, when I had a hard time getting pregnant, so we did IVF, and I've since realized, a lot of why that probably happened. So the early years were a bit of a blur for me because I had kids, two sets of twins, 2 years apart. So as you can imagine, it was a bit of a blur. But I know that when I became a mom, and when I was getting pregnant and when I became a mom, I really wanted to take what I learned as far as, what you eat and how you live makes such a difference. How you live in terms of managing your anxiety and quality of life really makes such a huge difference. And so I wanted to give them a leg up in life. I remember thinking that I'm going to raise them and teach them yoga from a young age, just so that they can learn to sit still with themselves, and breathe deeply. And also introducing them to all kinds of healthy foods and not keeping processed foods in the house and not doing that quick fix like, wow, I'm so stressed and I just need to get through the meal, so I'm going to give them chicken nuggets and mac and cheese and pasta.
Right.
They're going to eat, and I hear that and see that all of the time. But I really believe, and I believed even then, that is not a great way to get the job done, because even if you're just trying to get the job done in the immediate, it creates so many problems later. You're not teaching, you go the extra mile. You teach your kids that what you put in your body makes a huge difference in how you feel, and just how important that it is. So from day one, I was very committed to feeding them organic whenever possible and whenever necessary. I have a policy that, whatever you have access to and can afford in terms of quality of foods, that's what you should go with. And that's a
That's
priority.
right. I agree. So tell us about the symptoms that your daughter was experiencing before her diagnosis.
So, fast forward just a few years, I was trying to treat my kids very healthy and take care of them. But, and sleep was such a huge important thing for me, teaching them to sleep well from an early age. And so I felt like I was doing everything right, trying not to be too anxious of a mom, even though, given the circumstances. And really, quite suddenly, my daughter Ava, I guess it was the summer of 2013, maybe. She was 5 years old, and it was just before she was going to kindergarten. And she had this sudden onset of symptoms. It first presented itself when I would try to put her to bed at night for like a week. And she was always a good listener and always did a good job going to sleep. And she wouldn't stay down in her bed. She was bouncing out of bed. I look now and I see that she was having anxiety. At the time, I was like, God, are you just being difficult? What's going on here, So I, moved forward, being really strict about bedtime, thinking it was a phase, no big deal. But within a month, that turned into waking up in the middle of the night with night terrors. It turned to her having like the sweats, which was very strange, but she didn't have like illness symptoms, like traditional illness symptoms. She was having sensitivity to hot and cold. She started having digestive issues. She was complaining about her stomach and about nausea. And so she had a list of symptoms that sort of came out of nowhere. And she was starting kindergarten. So she and her twin sister, they started kindergarten in September, early September. So this is just maybe going on for 4 weeks.
Right.
And she started kindergarten, and I went to the doctor and I said, this is what's going on with my daughter. It's out of the ordinary, and I talked to the school and I would say, gosh, Ava would walk out of school and she'd have a whole, like she'd just fall into my arms with a whole list of complaints about her day. It was like she was so wound up, complaining about her day, super sensitive. And that just wasn't my child in the past. And the school and the doctor both said to me, kindergarten's a big deal. She's starting public school. It's a bigger environment. She's having separation anxiety, which she had never, ever had any kinds of separation anxiety. And it didn't really fit sort of the milestones that all of a sudden at 5 years old in kindergarten that she would have separation anxiety. Maybe anxiety to the new environment, but not separation anxiety. And so the doctor said, you know, if it's still persisting through November, you know, come talk to me about it. So the school and the doctors just weren't paying attention to me, and her symptoms were getting worse. I mean, she couldn't get through the night, like full on night terrors, like the anxiety became night terrors. She started sleepwalking. My husband was a sleepwalker as a kid, and he said, Traci, I think that she's actually sleepwalking. And this is a kid who was sleep trained at 4 months and never again, like an issue. And everything was a problem. You know, I would brush her hair and she would screech because she had so much pain with just a little bit of a knot. She would touch the bath water and scream that it was too hot. And then the next week it was too cold. And, you know, she couldn't go to the bathroom, like she was constipated. And then all of a sudden she'd have diarrhea. And so she was having these bizarre events. And her irritability and her temperament became such that I felt that I had a prepubescent child, like a prepubescent teenage girl. But she was 5.
Yeah, I think moms always know intuitively when something really is wrong.
And all of a sudden, I just felt like, it wasn't all of a sudden, but as the weeks progressed, I was feeling exactly what I felt in my 20s, going to all of these doctors and getting these experienced professionals that tell me, you know, it's anxiety, it's all in your head, it's no big deal, live with it, it's normal. And feeling, you know what? I am listening to these professionals because I'm a bit of a rule follower.
Yeah.
So I'm going to follow the rules. I'm going to listen to what the principal says and listen to what the teacher says. They don't see anything. And when the principal grabs my daughter by her arm and pulls her away from me saying, this is separation anxiety. So in the beginning, I'm the rule follower. I'm going to listen to what they say and do what they say. But my gut is telling me something different. I said, this is persisting long enough. This doesn't make sense. And I have a twin sister who's starting kindergarten at the same time and not having these symptoms. So finally I said, you know, she seems like she's having hormonal fluctuations of some sort, and she's nowhere near puberty.
Right.
I took her to see an endocrinologist. You know, I started doing my research and I said, you know, what kind of specialist do I need to see to just get some blood work and see what's going on with her? And so I took her to see an endocrinologist, and sure enough, they did a workup on her thyroid. They did a whole workup, and they said, wow, you know, she has the antibodies that would indicate hyperthyroid. She has the antibodies to indicate that she has Hashimoto's. But the interesting thing is that they said to me, or she said to me, however, her TSH is in the high normal range. And I think that you just need to seek a therapist for behavioral modification.
My
I
goodness.
think the issues are all behavioral. And they sent me on my way. And I felt like it was, you know, 20 something years earlier where nobody was listening to me. They didn't seriously. And I'm a smart gal. I have a good intuition. And it was really heartbreaking at that time. And I saw another one who basically said the same thing. And I said, that's it. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to take everything that I learned from my own suffering for so many years, and I'm going to go back to it. And I'm going to start the research, and real research. I don't mean like Googling things, you know. Started researching, what did this mean, this Hashimoto's? What did hypothyroid mean? And what did it mean for children? And what were the connections to her early days in life? The fact that she was in the NICU, the fact that she was born early, the fact that, you know, I've had autoimmune issues. And what did this mean? The fact that she wasn't breastfed for more than just, 3 weeks. And all of those things, what did it mean? You know, why does everybody say that breastfeeding is the optimal scenario. And then my kids, because they had colic and they had a cow's milk allergy, she and her twin sister had a cow's milk allergy, that everybody said, no, the top pediatric GI guy at NYU in the city said, oh, they'll both outgrow it by 12 months. And I started to connect the dots, and I said, you're not giving me the answer, so I need to take it many steps further and figure it out on my own. All of these things aren't a coincidence, they're connected. And now you and I both know, looking back, that wow, when they were prescribed Alimentum as their substitute for breast milk, there weren't even any probiotics in Alimentum. That's just your first clue, right? And I was doing the best I could at the time. And I questioned it at the time, but I had to have the faith in the doctors because I had twin colicky babies. I was up around the clock. My husband wasn't around to help with them. And so I had to move forward and trust the doctors. And then years later, just feeling that cringe, like, wow, why? I probably knew better. The regret and the sadness and the feeling of what did I do to my children? But I pushed ahead and said, now it's time to problem solve. Now it's time to figure it out and put it all together. And I really, I finally found a doctor who would listen to me, an endocrinologist, who respected me, but she was still an endocrinologist and she still had her methods of doing things. So healing my daughter was on me. I didn't have an integrative pediatrician available to me at the time. There wasn't one. And so I had to figure out how these gut issues played into her autoimmune and her Hashimoto's. And I moved forward in that direction, putting together a protocol for her.
So what kind how is your daughter doing now, and what kind of protocols or modalities did you use as far as nutrition or supplements, essential oils? Tell listeners a little bit about maybe some ideas of what you
Sure. So interesting enough, I did get her twin sister, who is not an identical twin, the fraternal twins. I tested her just to see, and she too has Hashimoto's, but she was euthyroid, as they say, so she had no symptoms. So we didn't need to do anything other than just be aware of it. So I focused really on Ava. I have since changed Michaela's diet and her supplementation as well, but I needed to really deal with the acute situation because Ava was having anxiety attacks. She even had a couple of panic attacks because she was, hyperthyroid. And even as grown women, we know just how hard it is to be hormonal in any capacity. And this is what she was feeling at the time. So we did get a therapist because at that point she was starting to have, feelings of terror going to school. And I didn't want her to forever associate how she felt at that time with going to school. So we did seek a therapist to help with sort of post-traumatic stress, which is what she had for some time. And I moved forward and put together a program for her to heal her leaky gut, because I assumed at that point that she had leaky gut, and I tested myself, had leaky gut, and some other issues. So I put a program together that she and I did in tandem. And she started drinking 2 cups of bone broth every single day. I started to support her with collagen and glutamine. I started giving her, she'd always taken omegas since the time that she was born, but I started supplementing even more, higher doses with that initially. Also, vitamin D. I started to do some real research on vitamin D3. And that's not something that doctors at the time were even talking to me about, taking vitamin D3. And they certainly weren't talking to us, pediatricians weren't talking to us about supplementing with D3. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, like anybody can not vitamin D3, particularly living in my part of the country. I'm in New Jersey. I was in New York City at the time. you don't get enough sunshine. And even when you are in the sunshine, we are loading our kids up with sunscreens. So they're not getting the vitamin D from the sun that they need to convert that in their bodies. And that was a significant thing. So I had them test her for vitamin D, and sure enough, her vitamin D was well off the charts. And I've also since learned that, optimal ranges are what we need to look for when we are, looking at our blood results. And I taught myself how to study blood results so that I didn't rely on the doctors just telling me, oh, she's good, she's bad. I started to look at it and understand that there's a big, 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 big difference. And there's that big gray area again when it comes to blood work. So vitamin D was a huge thing. I needed to supplement with vitamin D to get her up to optimal ranges, because it really supports anybody, but particularly people with autoimmune diseases. They really need to get that vitamin D3 into optimal range. The other important thing that I did was I took gluten out of her diet, which is tricky because she was 6 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And I said, I need to get gluten out of her diet. And again, most people are struggling just to get chicken nuggets and pasta down their kids' throats, And I'm saying, hey, let's get rid of gluten. And I had been 85 to 90% gluten-free for, since 2000, 2001 maybe. So I wasn't, big on breads and pastas anyhow. So we were having it probably, half the time as most families, and higher quality than most families. I was big on brown rice instead of pasta, which is great. But I had to up my game. I pulled her from dairy, and I pulled, or cow's milk, because that was a big clue for me also.
Mm-hmm.
When I went back and thought about it, I said, I don't think that our kids outgrow these things. I think what happens is you get bigger, your digestive system matures, and you are able to maybe sort of mask that symptom a little bit better. And I think that that's what happens. But I think that the underlying inflammation really stays there. And so I pulled her from that. I pulled her from gluten, and I said, she needs to eat real food. And she needs to do this for 6 months. And she really, she was taken taken to school. School lunches were salads, soups that were made with bone broth, and brown rice dishes. This is what she was taking to lunch. And, I showed her how, or I was really introducing her to the concept of what you put in your body makes you feel different. And she was really intuitive enough at such a young age, and in tune with herself, to recognize that
That's good.
were better when she put those things into her body. And at times when she would, so for 6 months, she was really, really tight with it. But then even after that, my kids all recognize that when they don't eat so clean, or like, let's say it's Christmas and mommy puts her hands up just a little bit and says, okay, 2 days, they all seem to get sick, or they have a little bit of diarrhea, or they'll throw up. So I taught her from a very early age, and my other children were watching, that what you put in your body really made a difference. And so that was really the key. She did have to take medicine, and at the time she was taking the standard Synthroid, which is what all the doctors prescribe, unless you can find an integrative doctor who will prescribe at least an all-natural one, which is what we both take now, is WP thyroid. Okay. But at the time she was taking Synthroid, and the doctor that I found said, I will research an alternative, and I will at least give it, consider it as an option. And she did, which was great. It was a big coup to get somebody from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia to prescribe an all-natural thyroid medication. But I think she trusted me enough and trusted my intuition, and that's why I continue to work with her and see her. As well as now I do have an integrative pediatrician, which is fantastic. But I'm really her health coach each and every day. I think the biggest thing is to understand, and I like to help people really understand that the gut is really sort of our center. and where so much of our health and wellness or our illness really comes from there. And leaky gut really is a thing. You know, my naturopath 20 years ago introduced me to the concept of leaky gut, but they were called quacks, and it wasn't a real thing. And now, you know, there's actually published articles from Johns Hopkins, you know, that says, wow, leaky gut is a real thing. You know, you know, Dr. Mullins from Johns Hopkins is saying leaky gut, we're not sure exactly everything, but this is something, and this is causing so many problems. It could be the root to some of these autoimmune diseases. And so that is just how I approach everything now. Is it starts and ends with the gut. It really does. And the other thing that's very interesting that I learned was that, you know, the first year that our babies are alive, our guts, we come into the world with this permeability, right? These tight junctions are permeable when we're born. And that's what the doctor meant when he said, oh, by 12 months, their digestive system will have matured enough that they could handle this. But so what happens is that permeability, those tight junctions close within the first year, right? And so then we have a secure gut lining, and then you can start eating different things, and your digestive system is mature, as they call it. But for children like mine, I don't think that gut lining was able to ever completely close,
Right.
because they were not getting probiotics, and you know, they had this cow's milk allergy, and then I started giving them milk. And so I think that the inflammation was pervasive for my girls. And that was really where their lives started. So I think autoimmune disease was inevitable. I think it was there, you know, and it was just a matter of time before something would trigger her Hashimoto's.
Yeah. I've always said that there's nothing more powerful than a mom on a mission. And it sounds like you've had quite a journey, and it basically turned out to be your passion and really has become your work. And so now tell us about your private practice. What kind of clients do you coach now as a holistic health coach?
I started early on, before I officially had a business, mentoring people and helping people, because I did share my story publicly in my town, because, you know, the mental illness component of it was a big thing. You know, my daughter was suffering from these anxiety attacks and diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. And thank God I followed my intuition, because I don't believe that she has general anxiety disorder. But at the time, you know, I discovered that she is a highly sensitive temperament. And so having a child who's highly sensitive is that sensitivity will trigger the autoimmune, whereas in her twin sister, it didn't happen. So that's also an important piece of it, you know, for people who have young children, to understand that the temperament that they're dealing with is a big part of it. And whatever your weakness is, I guess, like mine is thyroid, but I have friends who their weakness is, you know, their hair follicles. Like everybody has sort of a weakness. Some is their lungs, where it would be asthma or something. Knowing that you have this weakness, and knowing what that if any of your children have that sensitive temperament, is an important part of this. So I shared my story publicly, and that sort of got around in our town, and I started getting phone calls and emails from people in town, or a friend of a friend in another town, and asking me, what are you doing? How can you help me? And so I started helping people, and I was working several hours a week on doing this. I'm not just sharing my story, but sharing my protocol, and listening to them, and teaching them how to look through blood tests, or even knowing how to advocate to the doctors to get blood tests for their children. And I discovered that Hashimoto's is such a common thing in children that doctors weren't even looking for, and that this sensitive temperament played a lot into some of these children. And the anxiety. And so I started to see this correlation with these like symptoms. And that's basically how I started. And finally, you know, my husband and a very good friend of mine really encouraged me and said, Traci, so many people need this.
Yeah.
Please start a business doing this, start coaching. So somebody had mentioned IIN, and I said, I got to sign up, and this is what I'm going to do. Just, again, put one foot in front of the other and see where that journey takes you. And it took me to some really great places, because there are so many people that are so desperate. I find that moms will learn to live with their symptoms, but when it comes to your children, you'll climb mountains.
Yep.
That's
I agree. I agree.
what I started to see.
What would be, so this has been fantastic information. What would you say, as a final message that you would want to share to other moms that have sick kids?
I would like to say, do your research, do good research, and listen to your intuition. Our guts are our second brain, and there's a reason they say, you have these gut instincts, follow your gut. And there's so much truth to that. And I think it's so important to listen to that inner wisdom, and start paying close attention, based on that inner intuition, to what the symptoms are, and what makes a difference, even if it's small differences, and listen to what your kids are telling you, because they give us the messages sometimes when they tell us that they're struggling or that they're hurt. There's a message in that, and it's up to us to go deeper and find out what's going on there, because they don't have the words or the tools to be able to explain exactly what's going on. And so it's really up to us to advocate, fight for us, and fight for them. And, we also, moms are such an important example. And I think about this all the time. I tell my children, I want my children to grow up and have a voice, to feel like they can have a voice in any scenario, that they don't just walk away from a doctor or a teacher because they said so, and feel like they have to suffer quietly inside. We have to teach them how to advocate for themselves, and we do that by advocating for them. And I think it's so important, and for moms to realize that, this is our calling, and this is our responsibility. And it starts with ourselves. It starts with taking care of ourselves while we're trying to take better care of our children.
Well, this is amazing. I just really think this would be great information for anybody that's listening. And how can our listeners find you?
So you can find me on my website, www.Traci Altman, TraciAltman.com. And you can email me at Traci@TraciAltman.com. And I am here with so much information and so much passion about this. So anybody that needs to reach out, please do. You shouldn't suffer alone, suffer in silence, and, sit and watch your children suffer with these symptoms. There is so much that can be done. And my daughter Ava is unbelievable. I'm in awe of her all the time, because she is really taking control of this, followed my lead on this, and really, she's turning 10 next week, really believes that how she treats her body and how she takes care of herself makes the biggest difference in the world. And she is a sensitive temperament and always will be, but we've also learned that she is extremely creative because of that. And as long as she has creative outlets, and has some downtime, she doesn't suffer with anxiety. And it's a beautiful thing.
Well, thank you, Traci. I so appreciate you coming on and telling your story and your daughter's story. And I'm sure our listeners learned a lot. And if you'd like to learn more about me, I can be seen at groovybeats.com, and that's groovy and then beats like the beat that you eat. And thank you all for listening today.
Thank you so much, Leann.